The first thing I'd like to do for the training session is acknowledge the custodians of the lands on which most of us are based. So I'm guessing that means it's the Kabi Kabi people for us here on the Sunshine Coast campus, and for those of you in other parts of the country, hopefully you've been able to identify whose land you were on. I want to acknowledge pay respects to our elders, past and present, and pay our respects to the creation spirits, laws and customs as well, while we're able to exploit the privilege of studying and learning and researching on land that's never been ceded. Thanks very much for coming. We've got the privilege of having the fantastic Claire Smith-Moloney here from the Research Ethics Office. Claire could give you her own job title. I couldn't write it all down. It's a 3-sentence job title that Claire has working in the Research Ethics Office. Myself and Brittany have just had the chance to speak to Claire briefly, and we're really excited about the session this morning. What we're generally finding, as you're all aware, is that their compliance with and adherence to the principles and practices of human research ethics in Australia compared to and the challenges that brings in the Pacific has led to some gaps in the processes and knowledges that we need to bring to these processes. So hopefully you'll have a chance to ask Claire some questions about your ethics applications this morning. I just want to say thanks again for Claire for coming, and I'd like to acknowledge Amalia's contribution here as well, where she's been able to organise this training for us. So I hope you have a good session. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lee. Alrighty, I'm just mucking around with my screen. Sorry, I'm looking all over the place. Good morning, everybody. We've only got a few people today, so we're going to try and make this as useful and dynamic for you as possible. I'm hoping that you guys might have some questions and be able to fill me in on where you're up to and what you need at this point in time. So we can adapt this to whatever you need it to be today. I believe that they are recording it as well, and we did actually do a similar session to this a couple of years ago. So there actually is also some other resources that you might be able to tap into, but today we'll make it as dynamic as possible for you guys. So I'm one of those people that is happy to have questions thrown at me as we go through, happy to go off on whichever tangent we need to have this be useful. So thank you for the opportunity to have a chat with you guys today. My official job title, if you're ready to write it down, is the Senior Research Ethics and Integrity Officer with the Office of Research here at the university. So I'm based in the same building as Brittany in the Innovation Centre. For anyone else who's around, we're friendly, our doors open, we always answer emails and phone calls. So I suppose that's actually probably one of the most important messages that we like to get across, even though ethics can have a bad reputation of being tricky and scary and long-winded. Actually, we try to be really friendly and open, and we always love preventing a problem before it becomes a problem. So I think Amalia would attest to the idea of touch base early, say hi, let us help, and hopefully that makes it as smooth a process as possible. So do you guys mind if we do a really quick little snapshot of like who's in the room and what you were hoping to get out of today? Is anyone brave enough to actually turn off mute and chitty chat with me a little bit?
I'll start if you like.
Go for it.
I'm doing a history PhD where I don't think I'll be interviewing people.
Okay.
However, I will be looking at Indigenous experience.
Okay. Yep.
So I need to just see what degree of ethics I need to undertake.
Indigenous here in Australia, or in which location here in Australia?
Specifically Southeast Queensland.
Okay. All right. No worries. Thank you, Anthony. And you're right at the start by the sounds of it.
No. I'm a few years in.
Oh, you're a few years in. Okay. Yeah. All right. No worries. Anybody else brave enough to let me know where
I'm
they're
happy
planning
to-
on working?
I'm happy to jump in. I don't know,
Yes.
Claire, if you want to close the screen share while we're introducing ourselves, because everybody's like
can.
small little boxes.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, it's just nicer to.
That
Anyway,
better?
yeah, that's better. So my name is Lindy, and yeah, I'm a PhD student. I'm not yet confirmed, but about to. I'm kind of got my concept and ready for confirmation soon. But haven't applied for ethics yet.
Mhm.
I'm doing research with people from the Pacific Islands who are in Australia predominantly. I've just changed supervisor, and my new supervisor has suggested doing an offshore component, but I've worked in research in Papua New Guinea before, and I thought I don't want to go through that ethics process with, the in-country. Yeah, so I haven't decided if I'll be doing anything offshore.
Okay.
And my topic is violence against women. So another tricky topic from a ethical point of view.
Yeah. We like tricky topics.
They're the interesting ones, right?
They are the interesting ones. That's what we say.
I'll jump in. You just scared me, Lindy. I am Elodie. I just started my PhD in February, and I'm doing my first study. I'm doing my ethics document right now. And I'm gonna do interview in the Pacific.
Just in lots of different countries?
Yes.
Or have you got to focus?
All of them.
All of them. Love it.
No, maybe not all of them, but yeah, at least a few. And
go hard or go home.
Yeah. So yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Ellie.
No worries. I'll jump in next if no one else is. So I've already done my ethics application, so I'm in the moment of doing revisions.
Okay.
And so my topic area is heritage preservation in the South Pacific, mainly in Fiji, and what that looks like. And yeah, at the moment it's just getting some clarification around what ethics approval USC requires and what ethics approval like Fiji requires, like what certain levels of government that I need to talk to. Just some clarification around that is really where I'm at the moment.
Okay. All right. We'll touch on that.
I can jump in now. Hi, Claire. Hi, everyone. I'm Bridget. I am a PhD student, but I'm probably more here today to just get some understanding around ethics around the research work I'm involved in. So I've been part of various different projects over the years that have all been based in the Pacific, but usually our supervisor, the lead of the project, has kind of led the way with those ethics. And I'm slowly starting to get more autonomy with those applications and understanding what's required to do. So I'm really here today to just learn more. Yeah.
So good all in. That's cool. Thanks, Bridget.
I'll just jump just on the back of Bridget. I'm really similar. We work on the same projects together. So yeah, it's exactly what Bridget was saying.
Awesome. I love it. As we go through, we're getting more and more people in. That's so good. I think we started with 4, so this is great. More and more faces popping in.
I'll jump in next. So I'm Belinda and I'm doing an honours at the moment. Sorry, Em, I think I just cut in.
No, you're good.
So I'm just working on my first ethics that I've kind of had a bit more autonomy on myself, and similar to Bridget and Jenna, kind of just wanting to learn more of the processes so I can kind of do more of them on my own.
Yeah, okay, awesome. Thank you.
I was just going to say super quickly, I'm the same as Bridget, Jenna and Belinda. My supervisor usually takes the lead with the ethics process. So I've just started my PhD actually as of Monday. So very at the beginning. So I just like an overview of the whole process because it's very much been just following my supervisor at this point. So.
Alrighty, we're going to do that. I'm going to start at the start, and we'll kind of. I want to briefly kind of touch on how to find all of our information. What are some of the key things that I want you guys to know as you step through the process? We can dive into some questions about like how does it actually work on the ground. Although heads up, I'll tell the spoiler is it's tricky and it's a little bit case by case and you guys actually become the experts more than we do. But yes, we will cover off on all of those types of things. Was there anyone else who wanted to introduce themselves before we dive in?
I'll just jump in quickly. My name's Luke. I'm from the School of Science, Technology and Engineering. I've
welcome.
sort of avoided having to do ethics because I usually look at physical parameters of the environment. We've started a project, and what I'm interested in is that sort of grey area. We're sort of doing participatory research where I view most of the people we're working with as colleagues or other researchers themselves rather than actually subjects. So I'm just not sure how to go about that, especially with that whole framework where we're going to develop the questions. And it seems like I've been given the short straw of doing the ethics application for some reason. And I'm just not sure how we can put down what the questions we're going to ask when we're developing those as part of the process. So a little bit later, some clarification around that would be great. Thanks.
All right, no worries. We'll see what we can do. I'm sure we'll get there. We will get there. Okay. As we go through, please feel free to throw questions at me. I've been working in this space for just over 10 years now. So I know it like the back of my hand, but also it is an evolving space and things do change over time. So we like to say, we often find ourselves saying, particularly to our ethics committee members, we're learning something new every day as well. And so I think it is worth coming into this space, acknowledging that it's always shifting and we're always aiming to refine it and do better and be clearer and have a better experience for you guys. So please don't feel like you're alone if it feels a little daunting if you haven't gone through it before. It is a big process. We try to make it as simple as possible, but it is a big process, and there is a lot to consider. I think a lot of people say, oh gosh, ethics is so daunting. And it kind of is, because it's through the ethics process that you actually make all of the decisions you need to make to be able to be ready to jump out there and implement it on the ground. It's kind of it's often one of the final hurdles before you actually start working with people. And so there are actually a lot of decisions that have to be made through that ethics application process. And I think if you can engage with it and know that you're coming in and that there is going to be a bit of churn and discussion required and decisions required, and just know that that's normal. I think it's a big growth process for everyone, even if they've done it before. We've got academics who have been doing this for as long as I have, longer than I have, and they're still, finding different ways to do it and better ways to do it as they go along. So it is a growth process. Alrighty, I wanted to, for those of you who haven't even found our information online yet, I just wanted to start with a bit of an orientation of the resources that we have available for everyone. We have the exact same information available. We have to have the exact same information available for staff and students at the university. And so we actually house all of our information on the student portal now. So if you haven't already found us, we actually live on the student portal under this Learn tab. You'll find Research Ethics and Integrity. And so there's a heap of information here, and human research ethics is what we're focusing in on today. I've designed this information to be kind of, I hope it's user-friendly. I'm happy to receive feedback if you think it's not. But we've designed this to be like, start at the top, work your way through. So for those who have not even thought about ethics before, I'd recommend touching base with this training. It's a really simple self-paced initial intro, and then this preparing to apply page is kind of like a lot of links to background information and things. I don't expect you to read every single page, but sometimes it's useful to know what's there. So primarily, I suppose the number one guiding document, I'll give you two guiding documents I'd recommend you have a look at if you haven't already. I'd have the primary one that comes from the NHMRC is the National Statement on Ethical Conduct in Human Research. That is the number one ethics guiding document here in Australia. It also has a chapter on working with people overseas. So you do not need to read it cover to cover, but I would know that that is there because that is what we're assessing against. So our ethics, when you get ethics approval, basically that is saying that our review bodies, whether it be a full committee or us within the office or the chair of the committee, have have reviewed your application against this national statement and believe, yes, it is in line with that document. So if you're sitting there thinking, oh, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing or what benchmarks I'm supposed to be working to, it's that document. If you're working overseas, I would definitely have a look at that. If you're working with Indigenous communities here in Australia, there is also a chapter on that. Have a look at the table of contents, see what jumps out at you, and get familiar with the sections that appear to be most relevant to your research, would be my #1 recommendation. We also then have this guidelines document, and that's a little bit more of a that's an internal document that we've provided, which is meant to be a bit more of a digestible, how do you actually do it? Here at UniSC, they've changed the branding on me since I had a baby. And so that document, again, have a look at the table of contents and you'll get a little bit of a sense of the content that or the topics that you're probably going to end up needing to think about as you go through the process of getting ethics approval. And this is really, we like to think of this document as a really user-friendly guide of like, what should you be thinking about when you're thinking about these types of things. So it covers everything from how to actually use the online form, which is always a hot topic because it can feel a little bit daunting if you haven't used it before. So there's tips and tricks for the online human research ethics application form, information about, what actually needs ethics approval, how do you apply for it, how to think about risks and benefits, and how to recruit participants, and what you need to achieve to have informed consent. There's kind of chapters on all of those things, all the way through to like specific, those same kind of specific participant groups. If you're working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities or people in other countries, there's specific chapters here that I would also recommend having a look at. This guideline document is in line with the national statement. It's not trying to be different, but it kind of, you might find this language a little bit more user-friendly, hopefully. So I just wanted to orient you towards those documents. Let's see if we can navigate back to here. In terms of when you actually come to the process of applying, you'll jump into this tab. This talks about the different types of review pathways. So at the university, we use a risk-based approach to determine which project needs which level of review. So you will, or if you're working in other countries, you'll probably commonly hear people say, oh, I needed full ethics review by the committee. So the national statement does guide us towards having a full review of any international projects, but we also acknowledge that there's a lot of variation in those types of projects, and the level of risk associated with them can vary quite significantly. So we do try to take a pragmatic approach wherever we can. At the end of the day, it is the chair of the Human Research Ethics Committee that has the final say on the review pathway. So if in doubt, I would say, if you think, oh, look, it might fall into this full review space, the #1 advice I can give you is to be aware that the committee meets 11 times a year at the moment, so essentially monthly. And it's really, if you think it might fall into that space, it's really important that you understand that you're aware of the due dates for papers. So don't miss these dates, or you'll have some delays, which doesn't make anyone happy. If you think it's going to go committee, so if you're working with Indigenous communities here in Australia, or if you're working overseas, I would err on the side of caution, assume it's going to the committee. It's the same form regardless. So the entry point's actually the same. The main consideration is these due dates. So if in doubt, assume it's going to the committee. We will expedite it if we can. We will review it outside the committee if we can, because we like to be as efficient as possible. But if in doubt, know those dates. Don't miss them by a couple of days. This section also runs you through, so if you're not familiar at all with the actual process of applying for ethics approval, this is the page that has all of the instructions on how to actually apply, links to the online form. This is a quick reference guide of what the process is going to look like for you. Some people find that really useful to have a bigger picture snapshot of the actual ethics application process and what steps are involved, because there are quite a few steps. So we've developed that as a little bit of an overview. Have a look at that if you haven't already gone through the process. And then this links to the online form, which is designed to be supported by a protocol document. Recommend you have a look at that section 4 of the guidelines. Have that open as you're going through it, because there's some quick, easy answers to frequently asked questions in there. And then really an ethics application is designed to be supported by a number of different materials. So we've developed templates as much as we possibly can to make this as simple as possible for you. You should never feel like you're starting with a blank page. These can all be adapted to suit your participant group and your project. But yeah, we've tried to do as much groundwork as possible to make it simple. So the best advice that we give is actually write your project description or this protocol document first. That's intended to be like the bulk story of what it is you're doing and why. And then develop these supporting materials these are the materials that your participants will receive. So the recruitment materials, your research project information sheet and consent form is designed to support that informed consent approach. And then we will also ask for any data collection tools that you're planning on using. Sometimes data collection tools can be word for word. You know exactly what questions you want someone to answer in a survey. Sometimes they can be less structured. So if you're working with a community and you think, oh, yep, this is going to be more like a more informal interview, or you know, like we heard before, I think from Luke saying, like, we don't know exactly what questions we're asking yet. Give us the best you can. Give us the best idea you can, and just make it clear that it's going to be semi-structured and it will, you know, adapt depending on the conversation on the day. That's completely fine. But we want an idea. What are the types of things you're trying to, types of information you're trying to gather from people? In terms of the international space, or the whenever you're working with third parties, the questions will actually kind of guide you towards also providing evidence of local community engagement or support. And so that might come in the form of a letter of support or email support or something to show that you've actually engaged with the communities that you're hoping to work with and that they're supportive of the research. Ideally, we're aiming to be doing research with people, not on people. You know, you really get the best outcomes from a consultative type approach that applies both in Australia with Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities, to be honest, and overseas. So yeah, regardless of whether it's full review or what we call expedited review, which is kind of like a low risk review pathway that happens more so with us in the office and the chair more than the committee, it's actually the same form. The online form will adapt, will expand and collapse depending on what you're doing. You will see for the Indigenous and the international space, you'll see question 1.19 will ask you explicitly if the research participants include people who are overseas or Indigenous communities. And when you tick those boxes, you'll get some additional specific questions related to that. Don't be afraid of those questions. That's your opportunity to really demonstrate that, yes, you have gone through, you've really thought this through, and that you've gone through the process of intentionally designing the project to meet the needs of that community, or, you know, be in line with the priorities of that community.
Claire,
All right, any questions? Yes, that's my boring intro. From here on in, we're going to get more adaptive.
I just had a question about sort of thinking about research that needs consultation with community in order to apply for the ethics.
Yeah.
So would that mean, so I know some people do their ethics before their confirmation. Would it be, I'm thinking in my case, I need to go to the sites that I want to, like where I want to conduct the research. So maybe I would do my confirmation to set up my project, then potentially travel, do some scoping visits, more consultation with community, and then do the ethics after? Is that?
Yeah. Yeah, so you need ethics approval. So in terms of the boundaries for when you need ethics approval, you need ethics approval before you start recruiting any participants. So do not start recruiting individual participants and do not start collecting data before you have the ethics approval. That's kind of like the easiest line in the sand that we can draw for people. Now, when we say recruitment, we mean like, hi, I'm doing this research project. Would you like to participate? Yes, great, thanks, let's go. Like, do not start that kind of individual recruitment process prior. What you can start prior is that community consultation. Hi, we're thinking about doing this. Can we talk to you about, you know, how this might work for your community? Is this a priority? How could we design this research project in a way that meets your needs? You know, and have those conversations. So often the best projects are designed in consultation with community. I fully recognize that in some cases you will have specific communities you're planning on working with, and it's a little bit easier, you know, to find an appropriate representative to talk to. Other projects, there is no specific community. It might be much broader, and so that can be a little bit different. So there isn't really a one-size-fits-all approach, but if you have a look at those international or Indigenous guidelines, it'll actually prompt you to look at some other international guidelines and Indigenous guidelines, and those will actually step you through that consultation process and give you a bit of guidance about in what order and for what purpose that consultation kind of happens. So know that there's some specific guidelines around that work as well, which might be useful for you. But yes, usually we see people do their ethics application after they've done confirmation, because again, I think the confirmation process is a really important one to help you get your head around what you're trying to do and why, to really design your research project. The ethics application, some people are doing the ethics application in their first year, some people are doing it in their 5th year. It really just depends on the way the project is designed and what you're trying to achieve and in what order it all needs to happen. But my best advice would be, don't try to write an ethics application for a project that you haven't really designed in full yet. You'll really struggle to answer all of the questions. Some people might start the ethics application and that might be the prompt to go, oh, I realize that I need a lot more clarity before I can do this, and that's okay. I think it's good to get familiar with the process as early as possible, but you will, if you're clear on what you're doing and why, the ethics application will be relatively simple. If you're not clear on what you're doing and why, then it'll probably come as a little bit more of a shock. But that's okay. It's all part of the process.
Claire, can I just
Yeah.
make a point for students that may not know, because I didn't know this when I put in my ethics application. So you spoke about before, like the due dates of when it goes to the committee, depending on your school. So I'm in the School of Law and Society. So they need your application to be in by the last date is like the 5th of each month before it can go to the ethics committee. So you need approval from your school first before you can submit to the ethics committee. I'm not sure if that's for all schools, but Law and Society requires they need to see your full application before it can go to the committee.
That's a really good point. So that's tapping into this peer review process and also this line manager authorization process. Thank you, Zoe, for flagging that. I do think that every school does it. It's very possible that each school and centre manages it a little bit differently. So definitely have a chat to your supervisor or someone who's familiar with this process if you're not already clear on how each school or centre is managing that. That's a very good point. Thank you. It's also, I think it's also worth acknowledging that once we get it, we do an initial check to make sure that it's complete. So we kind of do an initial like quick look to make sure that all of the key documents that we would normally expect to see have been submitted. If not, you'll get an email back from us within a couple of days saying, well, either way, actually, you'll get an email in a couple of days from us saying, thank you, your application's complete. We'll review it within this time frame, or actually, you know, thank you for your application, but it's incomplete. We also need X, Y, and Z. So we will try and get it as complete as possible ASAP. Please also know that we use an online form. So this HREA form is an online externally managed form. You create your own password. The guidelines give you this instruction, but you create your own password. It's not a UniSC system. And also, when you get to the end of that application form, there's a big green button that says Generate HREA. Every now and again, even though we put it in bold in as many places as we possibly can, please know that if we don't receive the application through the HREA system, you have to email it to us. We can't see behind the scenes in the system. It's not our system. The system is designed to guide you through and to create the form and upload all of the relevant attachments. When you generate it, it will download a zip file and what they call an Omni file. And our best advice is always download every document. It gives you the option to download and then email us all of those documents. And you will get, if you submit an application to us, we will get back to you usually within 2 days to say, thanks, got it, it's complete or not. So we're very quick. It absolutely breaks our heart. Most people get this now. I've been using this system for a really long time. I think we give good instructions, but every now and again, about one person a year will email us and say, I submitted my application 6 months ago. I just wanted to check where it's up to. Please know that we will never let anything sit for 6 months. We are not that bad. So if you don't email it to us, we don't have it. If you don't get confirmation from us within, say, a week, absolutely touch base sooner rather than later, because every now and again, sometimes people forget to email or they think someone else has emailed it or whatnot. So we don't like hearts to break. It breaks ours, it breaks yours. It's, yeah, we're not that bad. We're quite quick in terms of our turnaround. A low risk application, we'll review it and usually have feedback out to you within a week or two. If it's going to the committee, you'll get feedback from us the following week after the committee. So we're quite quick in terms of the turnaround times, actually, compared to a lot of other committees, which is amazing. It's also worth acknowledging, I think, that 99% of applications get feedback, and that's okay. So be prepared to receive feedback from us. We try to provide action-oriented feedback as much as possible to help you through that process. Sometimes feedback will feel big and sometimes it will feel easy. It just depends. And I think it's also worth acknowledging that, you know, if you've got a project that requires full review by the committee, it's being looked at by about 20 people. And sometimes it's just a case of 20 fresh sets of eyes. We'll find things, you know, you might think it's very clear in your head, but fresh eyes catch different things. And ultimately we're aiming for clarification on things. So we don't give feedback to try and stop projects. We give feedback to try and get them approved as quickly as possible. Sorry, my lighting's gone all funny. Is that okay as an initial admin intro? Anyone have any questions on that section of it? All right, let's dive into the actual international components of it. So I think one of the main questions that came through in those intros was, in what order do we do everything? Which approvals do I need and in what order do I get them? I'm actually going to jump into our guidelines document because we kind of touch on this a little bit and I think it's a useful reference. Oh, my screen's gone all funny. Here we go. I'm going to do this from a research in other countries, but it actually also kind of applies to Australia. So really, whenever you're working with communities or organisations or third parties in terms of the research, it is important to consider whether you need any other approvals from local organisations or communities. So we have a couple of key documents here that may be useful to give you an initial sense of what approval processes exist in the country that you're working with. There's never going to be a perfect system. Things are adapting all of the time. And I would say that actually in many ways, you guys, as the researchers who are working in these countries, are the experts in this space. So there is going to be a little bit of probably legwork required to figure out what approvals are required before you go in country. In some cases, it might simply be a letter of support from a community elder or an organisation representing that community or organisation. In other cases, the country might have formal ethics approval processes in place. How you find that out probably starts with a conversation with your supervisor, a bit of a Google search, and then approaching the organisation. So, for example, we had one recently where someone was planning health research in Fiji, and actually the committee used these resources, ethics approval processes in the Pacific, as a summary document that someone else has created. And it indicated that, yes, the Ministry of Health does have an ethics approval process. We recommended that the research team approach the Ministry of Health to clarify whether they do need local ethics approval. And actually, to everyone's surprise, well, not everyone's surprise, but to some people's surprise, the answer came back, yes, you do need Ministry of Health ethics approval for this work. So you kind of don't know until you ask the question. So I would recommend not being afraid to ask the question. And I would recommend asking that question as early as possible so that you're clear about what approvals are required and in what order. Even if you have, so in some cases, people might get local ethics approval first. And if that approval is in line with Australian standards, which is a little bit tricky to know until we see it. But if it's in line with Australian standards, we might actually be able to do an application via what we call a prior review pathway. So that actually, in some cases, might be a very efficient process. In other cases, people will prefer to go through a full review process with us and then kind of see the local ethics approval as a bit of a secondary but complementary process. So in the example that I'm thinking of recently, the team actually came to us first. We then and then as part of our review that we recommended that they approach the Ministry of Health. They then approached the Ministry of Health and got their approval. And actually the feedback we got was that their approval was in line with the feedback, like the feedback they received from the Ministry of Health in Fiji was actually in line with the feedback our ethics committee had given. So that was nice. That was a good reassuring process to know that even though we're following Australian ethics standards, they are actually complementary to a lot of the in-country standards elsewhere as well. And when you see the national statement, it actually points to the importance of working with and being respectful of local customs and cultures. So yeah, there is definitely space for it to be adapted to the countries that you're working in. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts on that idea? So this is a little bit of a step-by-step of what I'm kind of talking about. When submitting an application, you need to determine whether ethics approval also needs to be obtained from an ethics review body in the country, and whether their approval should be sought first or our approval should be sought first. If at any point you get some advice to say, yes, we need it, or no, we don't, and you're just really not sure in what order to do it, you're welcome to give us a call, flick us an email, and we can kind of talk it through early. Please don't waste too much time thinking, I don't know what to do. I've got, different conflicting advice or something like that. There's always a way forward. And some bodies will say, like, we're very used to some ethics committees saying, we have to go first. UniSC has to go second, and others will say the exact opposite. No, you must have ethics approval from your own institution first, and then we go second. We're very used to both scenarios, and sometimes you just don't know until you start asking those questions. So that is a bit of a case-by-case one. The ethics application form will ask you questions about this. So it will actually say, if you're working in other countries, it will actually ask you, are you working in other countries? Yes. Which countries are you working in? You'll create a list for those of you who are working in lots of different ones. Sorry, you will be answering that question a lot. It'll ask you which countries. It'll then ask you if there's ethics approval processes in that country. Please know that that question is not asking whether you need local ethics approval for this project. It is just asking if there is ethics approval processes in that country. So if there are, please say yes, and then you will get the option to kind of expand further about, whether you're actually going to get ethics approval in that country for your work specifically. If you're not, you can explain that, but ideally we would like to see a reference point. Give us a website or a letter or an email from that ethics committee confirming, no, you don't need our approval. If you say we're working in Fiji, no, there's no ethics approval processes, it kind of cuts off the communication, and we end up having to come back and say, well, there is. So, we need more information. So yeah, that's probably my best tip. That's kind of where we see the form is not perfect, and when people kind of go, no, we don't need approval, it creates a bit of a gap in the understanding for everyone. So yeah, the questions will guide you through that. It'll also guide you through things like, particularly with the Indigenous space, it'll ask you lots of questions like, how have you consulted with community? How have you designed the research in line with the relevant ethics guidelines, which really are centered around consultation and respect and reciprocal benefit and type things. So if you're familiar with those guidelines, those questions are going to be much easier to answer. And I think in a lot of cases, people actually have the right idea of what they're planning to do, and it's very well intentioned and often in line with these guidelines. But if you don't know what the guidelines are, then it will feel disconnected. So even if you're very experienced in working in these spaces, I would recommend having a look at those guidelines as a kind of grounding document for you.
Claire, just a question.
Yeah.
International research, is that only if you physically go to the country? I'm thinking about if I'm doing interviews with people who might be in the Pacific, maybe not as the main thing, but then some of my stakeholders may be there.
Yeah. So the national statement doesn't really specify. It kind of talks more so about whether the participants are in other countries rather than whether you will be going to the other country. I think there is definitely some additional, well, there's pros and cons, right? There's pros and cons. Sometimes it's more risky to be in country. Sometimes it's more risky to not be in country. Like, it depends on what the local customs are. I think in your case, if you were approaching Pacific Islanders who are residing in Australia, you wouldn't tick the people in other countries box. But if you were recruiting them intentionally from other countries, then you would. The form is not always perfect. It does, we see responses just need to kind of do, you just need to kind of do the best you can to describe the project within the questions. It's a little bit of a case by case. We see people go a couple of different ways. Do what you think makes most sense to you. We will guide you otherwise if we think it's really impeding our understanding of the project.
Okay.
But yeah, if they're in Australia, I wouldn't recommend ticking international, which is probably why you've been given some of that advice.
Well, I'm thinking most of my participants will be in Australia, but I probably want to speak to maybe violence against
Yeah.
women's services in a couple of countries to also
Yeah.
the general stakeholder,
Yeah.
interviews.
Yeah. And so if you're going to bundle all of that together, I would actually just say, yes, there will be some people in other countries, and just work through the questions. I think actually sometimes people think, oh no, don't tick the box that answers. You have to answer all these extra questions, but often it actually facilitates it and lets it flow smoother than if you don't. So if in doubt, probably tick the box and work through those questions, and it just helps reassure us, and we can go, oh, yep, good, no worries. Yeah. So yeah, and that also kind of raises the question of, like, sometimes we see projects where there are very different methods being used, or different participant groups being used. You know, an ethics application can be, in some ways, an ethics application can be as narrow or broad as it needs to be. We see some projects where it's like, we're doing one survey and it's with this group, and it might only take a month, and we only need ethics approval for a couple of months or something like that. And we see other projects that are like, we have 3 phases and it's going to go for 5 years, and we've got all of these different participant groups and all of these different data collection methods. And so it does really depend. We've seen it all. So it can be as large, as broad or narrow as it needs to be. But again, my advice would be, if you have a 3-phase project and you don't know what phase 2 and 3 looks like until you've done phase 1, please don't try to write an ethics application for 2 and 3 until you've finished 1, because you will struggle and we will struggle, and it will take extra time and it'll be confusing, and it usually isn't the most efficient way to do it. Sometimes we see a little bit of culture around, like, oh, I don't want to do a whole new ethics application, I'll just do an amendment. And people might start with phase 1 in an application, and then they'll be like, oh no, I don't want to go through the whole process again, I'll just do this amendment, I'll tack phase 2 on. Sometimes that works okay, sometimes it makes it more complicated than it needs to be. If you at that point you're thinking, I don't know the best way to go here, again, you're welcome to call us and talk it through. It's a bit of a case-by-case basis, but generally we would say, do whatever you think is going to keep the paperwork as organized as possible, because either way we're going to need the same amount of information about that phase of the study. So an amendment sometimes actually makes it more complicated, because you then have to think about 2 phases in one set of documents, and it can get complicated. So just a bit of a heads up about that if you ever get to that point. Sometimes it's not as simple as just do an amendment, so you don't have to do another peer review or whatever. All right, we've only got about 10 minutes left. I want to make sure that I answer any burning questions. Is this useful? Not useful? Specific enough? Not specific enough?
Claire, I just had a quick
Yeah.
question just about where to access this. I heard at the start that you said it was available on the student portal.
Yeah.
I just think if that's also available on the staff.
It is. So we actually link through. So staff primarily will access it through my UniSC. And then through this, through research ethics and integrity here. The search functions in these things are never as good as they should be, unfortunately. But people will navigate through this human ethics space. And actually, when they click on this link in SharePoint, it brings them over to the student portal, because this way we can have it accessible to both staff and students.
Yeah, awesome.
Equally. I think it should also work if you kind of do some searches. Like, yes, this will land you where you need to be.
Perfect. All right. Thanks for that. Appreciate
Student
it.
portal should hopefully also do the same. Yes, it does. So yes, the search function should get you there. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Whose questions haven't I answered yet?
If no one's going, I have another question. Everybody's
for it.
probably sick of me. Is there any, I'm thinking about reimbursement for time for participants. I know I've kind of heard rumors that sometimes ethics committees don't like cash. Just wondering if there's any particular
we actually have a section on incentives and reimbursements in the guidelines. It's kind of one of those things where we will be guided by what's considered most culturally appropriate for the group that you're working with. So if you think we kind of don't have a hard and fast rule. I think finance went through a phase where they were preferring direct debit rather than gift cards, because I think there was a gift card drama at some point. That might not be appropriate for the communities that you guys are working with. In a lot of Pacific communities, we tend to see offerings of small goods, or things that are going to be most that are considered culturally appropriate for the group that you're working with. I would say whatever you think is appropriate, tell us what it is and why. And as long as there's clear justification, it's probably fine. In terms of reimbursement, the key thing around reimbursements is that balancing act between it being a reimbursement for time versus an incentive to participate. So we want to acknowledge and respect the time requirements for people to participate and reimburse them for that at an appropriate value. But we don't want it to be seen as like, do a 5-minute survey, everyone gets an iPad, to the point where it would pressure people to participate or, change their decision about whether they wanted to participate, particularly if it was a riskier project, those types of things. So we kind of just are trying to be mindful of that boundary between reimbursement and incentive. And then what's culturally appropriate are probably the two primary things. We won't probably give you specific advice on cash versus card versus goods versus whatever, as long as you can kind of assure us that what you're planning is considered and culturally appropriate.
Thanks.
My other best advice is work with your supervisors, connect in as students. We got, it is tricky. We're all kind of in different spaces and at different time points along our journeys. But, we have said to people, like, find someone who's gone through this process before, buy them a coffee, or, ask if you can have a chat about their experience of the process, even have a look at their application if they're willing. We don't share other people's information, obviously due to privacy issues, but, there's a lot to learn from other people's experiences. You're not the first person going through the process. You're the first person doing your specific project, but there are a lot of shared learnings that can exist in this space. So yeah, sometimes it's actually really useful to just talk it through with someone else who's gone through it, and you'll get the good, bad, and the ugly stories. I have no doubt. Like, sometimes people come to us and say, "Oh my gosh, you guys are amazing. This was so efficient. The instructions made complete sense. This was fantastic. Thank you so much." And in the exact same week, someone else will come and say, "Oh my gosh, ethics is the worst. This is so hard. I don't even know what I'm supposed to do." So, we know that everyone's experience is a little bit different. We try to make it as straightforward as possible, but full acknowledgement, it is still a big learning curve, surrounded by other big learning curves. If you're, new to the research process, which a lot of you are, it is a learning curve. So I know that it can feel daunting, but know that you're not the first person going through it. We are here to help. Your supervisors are here to help. Sometimes a 5-minute conversation can result in a lot of clarity and efficiency. So if in doubt, ask the question, would be my advice. There you go. We're at 5:02. If anyone's got any other questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. I hope that was useful. I know we probably didn't get, it's hard to kind of get really deep down into everyone's projects, but I hope that was useful. And I hope we touched on, at least got you to a point where you know where you're headed next a little bit. I can see there's some questions.
That was
in
awesome.
chat,
Thank
maybe.
you.
No worries.
Thanks, Claire. That was
Thank
great.
you. Alrighty. Our contact details are always on these pages somewhere. Human ethics is our email, humanethics@usc.edu.au. It's plastered all over these guidelines and forms and web pages and things like that. So if you ever need us, just touch base.
Brilliant. Thanks so
Yeah.
much for your help, Claire. That's wonderful. Thanks for walking our team through.
No
I'm sure you
worries.
have lots of follow-up questions.
Yeah. So no, but really, how do we actually do it? Alrighty. I hope everyone
Thank you,
has a
Claire.
good day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brittany, for coordinating at the last second.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.